What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers, getting into resolution. So you saw me do it there earlier in the little jam, essentially using the Dorian pentatonic over top of the Aeolian pentatonic. Yeah, let that bake your noodle, if you will. Essentially, resolution is just sort of like an overarching concept. It's like tension and release, okay? But I think of resolution as like something that you're always baking into the cake. You're always working towards resolution. And sometimes you can have like little mini events that build up to an even bigger resolution, you know? So it's not like it's like this thing you can use. It's a state of mind. And when you start to play like this, obviously your playing goes way up because it sounds more creative and less predictable because you have this ability, right? Which is the ability to now essentially work towards a goal. So you're like, I want to end here in the diatonic scale. So I'm going to set it up by using superimposition, by using the dominant 7 for my spiciness, for using diminished. And then you can start to work backwards, if you will, and incorporate that into your practice sessions. So again, in this case, you kind of hear where I'm going with this. I didn't go crazy, but effectively what you're doing is creating enough sort of, tension, if you will, for the listener. In this case, when I'm ascending with the Dorian position so that I can get that pleasing sort of release when I move to the Aeolian position and then start playing in that. Right now, listen, how it works out modally is up to you. It really depends on what your ear is tuned for and what you're interested in. But you know what I mean? The concept here is not just layering two scales over top of each other because you can. Now you're doing it because you want to create this effect, resolution, right? Or tension and release. I think of that more as chords, but you do you. And like I said, this is a big one, like technique. It's not like you can put your finger on it. There's a whole bunch of different techniques. There's a whole bunch of different ways of resolving something, right? So don't try to, dumb it down to the lowest common denominator. Instead, think of it as like a big guitar technique, if you will, that you're starting to actively exercise so you can, again, affect this particular outcome. So long story short is that obviously when you're not like, improvising and doing it sort of competently and skillfully, you have to sort of work up some practice exercises. So again, I kind of factor in these two sequences. You'll hear me do them now. This is a good way to sort of practice up and then of course put some music on and whatnot and just practice along to it and then work on your groove and your timing and whatnot. So we're going to move on to the next section where I start using, diatonic ideas factored in. And then I use this one too, incorporate it in, and you'll be like, okay, I'm starting to see what he's talking about. You shift the focus of the music when you're doing your melodies and stuff. So it feels like you're kind of moving in and out of the key, which technically you are, but that effect is very elusive and a lot of people quest after it. So let's get into the next section. There was some arpeggios, basically diatonically. I'm starting off in the Mixolydian position. I'm actually playing a major 9 there. And then I move into the Aeolian position and I play, yes, this extension onto it. Of course, I've played a trillion times before. moving up to the Ionian position, and then jumping up one more time to the third, which is Phrygian, and playing a minor instead of the first inversion, which was something I would normally do, but there it is. I play the minor, and then I use that major to descend using that cool little 3-in-1 technique. That's resolution right there. When I move to the Phrygian position, I have a whole bunch more choices, and it's a much more what I call fluid position, so you can do way more. You can get away with a lot more than opposed to like the Ionian position or something else like that. So food for thought. Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, they're very liquidy. You know, you can just kind of twist them and do all kinds of crazy stuff. I didn't really realize how you know, interchangeable they are. So food for thought there. But in this case, I'm using that to my advantage. I know that the minor sort of triad exists over the first inversion major there. And I just use two different techniques. One, I do sweeping, and then the major, I use the 3-in-1 technique to descend, moving down to F major and then jumping into the pentatonic again, which sets up again this, effectively, I'm playing D Dorian. But I'm doing a whole bunch of extra notes. In this case, I'm using effectively the major and the Dorian mode side by side. But I put them backwards. I kind of moved the Dorian mode to where Locrian would normally be and sort of orient everything around that pentatonic shape that happens at, yes, Dorian, or D in this case, the 10th fret. So there's a lot of information to unpack there. I get it. But if you watch my fingers, you can kind of see me just outlining these particular shapes and whatnot. And realistically speaking, that's really what you have to do when you're practicing is not only just lock down these shapes, but start adding in the extra notes when you play it like this, when you play it like this, move it down a half step, move it up a half step. That sense of, you know, adventure and sort of inquisitiveness is really important to keep your practice sessions fresh. So that's it for this guy. Practice the diatonic sequence and then factor in something like a pivoting section like I do at the Phrygian position, because I can do major and minor, and then just work on two different techniques. So you're going to ascend using a sweep, but you're going to descend doing something else, maybe a scale fragment, 3 notes per string, who knows. But either way, and then use economy picking, you know what I mean? And the thing is you're thinking about it beforehand. You're like, yeah, I want to get into that right now, right? And of course, you can feel me building it up more. And I guess get that flip flop is another sort of really big one. So I'm sort of droning on here. I'm going to end it here. We're going to listen to this last section, and then there'll be some thoughts at the very end. Kicking it up a notch now with the harmonic minor, of course, one of my new favorite. Now, of course, you can see me now smoothing out some of the rough edges by basically combining 3 notes per string with the harmonic minor. And where you have a whole step configuration based on the way I learned the scales myself personally, because I prefer them being vertical like this, I just use some chromaticism, which helps me sort of speed up the process rather than just doing two fingers or whatnot. I can, obviously, but slows you down. But throwing that into the mix now, obviously, you can hear that it really starts to add a new element to the music. And of course, you have sort of all the basic elements being exhibited for a solo and how you should be practicing. This is the where you want to end up when you're practicing. You're just doing stuff like this over some crappy AI music. And people are like, why are you using that for a backing track? Because you got to fight fire with fire, man. If I put my own music up, the AI will just scan it and steal mine. Sweet mine will just feed back its own garbage. And then it starts to corrupt, which I've noticed actually. There are times when it does a really weird sort of detuning. Maybe they're trying to do the 432 hertz thing. I don't know, being sneaky or something like that. Copyright situation, who cares? But that's just it. You know what I mean? So as sort of, and here's the thing, like this one here is pretty peppy. Obviously, it's pretty fast. I was actually feeling pretty challenged. I was like, ooh, that's a lot faster than I was expecting. Old man, but the fact of the matter is that there's a whole bunch of them there, and you can get a really killer practice session in, and a lot of different vibes, a lot of different and weird keys like F major and like A flat major. They're just brutal, right? So that's my thing. Is there's no predictability with the AI. You just get thrown in the grinder. And of course, you're working on resolution and technique at the same time and planning out your licks. You're starting to put the dots on the map. You're like, I'm going to start off here, but then to set up the wherever I'm going to do tension and release or some form of resolution, right? So I'm going to spice it up with this diminished and then go into the pentatonic and do something spicy and juicy there, right? Done. That as soon as you start thinking and practicing and playing like that, the whole game changes. It's just a question of syncing up all the information like chords, arpeggios, scales. Obviously, that's a huge job. But once you start, your thinking aligns. There's not like multiple threads. It all comes into one. And you start working on that skill set to basically be like, fully engaged, if you will, with the practice session so that you're actually focusing in on the most important things, which is the global stuff. That's nice if you can play like this really fast lick in isolation. But as soon as you get off the beaten path, you're just like, I'm lost. That's not good, right? I've been there a million times. So that's why it's so key to, ear training and working on your fretboard knowledge, technique, and everything else, but also these musical things. Otherwise, you just become a soulless shredder, I guess. And it's actually kind of like a form of hell because you deeply want to be able to express yourself in more interesting ways. And this obviously helps out massively. But you can't because it's just a bridge too far. And it's not necessarily your playing chops. It's a mental thing, right? So again, try to factor in these concepts of synergy and resolution, tension and release, right? Superimposition. And they all kind of like overlap in their own way. You can see similarities and whatnot, but there's key moments when you're like, I want to superimpose something here because it's a lot more unconventional than just doing your standard sort of like, resolution idea where I want to set up the place where I want to go. Now, all of a sudden, I want something that's like totally shifting the vibe into a new territory. It's just weird guitar stuff, Alan Holdsworth or whatever. So, you know what I mean? That's how you got to sort of start to differentiate. But most people don't have this supervisory level sort of awareness, and then they wonder why they're not getting better on the guitar. Or just that music in general is because you're not exercising one of the key skills here, which is your ability to actually conceive of music in a way that's logical, that makes sense and not random. It's a constructed sentence, if you will, to be like, oh, I went from here to here. Maybe in the moment, what you're playing is more sort of laissez-faire, but the idea to be like, I'm starting off in Dorian is not. Food for thought. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you guys. You know it. Every single one of you, get practicing. I know this stuff is deep. I'm just trying to get this out here now so it doesn't get lost in the mix because we're just losing so many great musicians. There's just not enough of them. Telling you the real stuff. That's just it. We could sit here and go through a bunch of scales and arpeggios and all the rest of that stuff, and I've done that with you. But the point being here is that there comes a point where you have to put down the practice session and pick up the improvisation skills. And that means just putting on some music and being able to play along with it. You're like, I want to move over to some triads and some chords. Is that going to totally fuck you? You know what I mean? Like, if that's the situation, I rest my case. So, you know what I mean? And then as soon as you're like, oh, well, I landed on this chord, it kind of works. Can I work from here backwards to get to a better position and make it sound cool? You know, sometimes you got to fake it. I totally get it. You know what I mean? Nobody's perfect. And that's the other thing, the last thing. You can hear me kind of lose it on the harmonic minor one because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I kind of tripped over myself. But I just kept going, and it worked out in the end. And it ended up being up a pretty cool lick overall. So that's my thing, is just because all of a sudden things start to fall apart a little bit or you're on the hairy edge, just keep going, head down, right? So take all of this stuff and incorporate it into your sessions. Don't just be like, oh, look, practice scales, practice arpeggios, practice chords, caged, whatever. No. Take those things and put them together creatively where you're thinking about it. Be like, start off with a chord, move into an arpeggio to a scale, end on another chord. That is a real practice session that you came up with yourself based on your own personal preferences. Do that every single day when you practice. You'll be a monster guitar player, I promise you. But don't do that. And then don't engage these supervisory skills on top of it, which come innately once you start doing this anyways. You'll be like, that didn't sound right. And you'll make subtle changes. You'll be like, I get it, resolution. And there it is. You'll actually get where you want to be. It's not about shred or speed or whatever else it is. It's just being able to express yourself musically. You know what I mean? I like Mark Knopfler. I watched a whole video of him yesterday. He's awesome, right? Same thing with Gilmore. I have no issue with people that don't play fast. I like to play fast. But that's not the only way of playing, and that's my thing, is they're showing you resolution in their way. Are you paying attention? Are you even listening for it? That's my point. You'd be like, listen to that chord. That's clearly diminished or clearly dominant 7. Perfect opportunity to set up some sort of resolution. Nails it. You see what I mean? It starts in the real world. You're like, oh, every time they go to this chord, it's a 7 chord, right? Boom. You pick up on that. You're like, I'm going to do this diminished into dominant 7 and then end on the root. And then people are like, damn. See you in the next one.